FCX is a fuel cell car, and for those of you not familiar with that technology, basically a user takes his or her car to a filling station. They fill up their tank with pressurized hydrogen. That hydrogen is then combined with compressed air through a membrane, and basically there's a chemical reaction producing electricity, which is then used to power the car. So that's great. The car doesn't require any gasoline whatsoever. But even better than that, the only other byproduct of the reaction is water. So it's totally free of harmful emissions. It's a really actually pretty impressive green technology. So Honda's actually done a pretty good job so far of creating buzz and awareness in Southern California. The car has been released to 3 submarkets in and around Los Angeles, and people are starting to buy them and notice them. Right now, the car actually sells at a loss, each one of them. The main reason being that it's so expensive to produce. But that's actually that's part of Honda's strategy. The idea being that if they can generate more buzz and awareness right now, there will be increased demand for the next generation FCX, which will hopefully be cheaper to produce and can turn a profit. So the next phase of the strategy implementation is moving on to the next market beyond Los Angeles. And on this map here you see the green, which represents all the potential markets that Honda could enter. So that's a total of 331 markets overall. So with all that green, where do we start? Well, Honda has several considerations that they need to think about when they're considering this decision. First, who are the target consumers? How old are they? Are they families or individual users? How much money do they make? Secondly, they want to know what's the environmental awareness of each potential market. Is it a really green city and really progressive? They might be more receptive to this car, etc. And lastly, of course, they have to be aware of the limited resources, namely time and money, that they have. So with all these potential options and all these considerations, it's pretty clear that they need a robust analytical tool to help solve their problem.
So we have created this tool to support their decision-making process. This is a snapshot, this is a screenshot of our dashboard, and as you can see, there are 3 distinct elements on it. So the leftmost part is the input fields. Our process is a 3-step process. So we take inputs from the user in those 3 steps. Then the next part, the middle part, is the summary of the outputs. So these are the main outputs, like what demographics they want to focus on, then which are the cities which are really top on the green score, and what would be the final markets they should look at. And we show this output graphically as well on the map point. So this is the dynamically updated map point. So all these results will be showed as green, will be marked green on the map of the US. So I will take you through the 3 steps which I talked about. So the first step is just the filtering criteria to reduce the pool of 331 markets which Ben talked about based on population, age, household income, and college education. So from our research we found that these are the characteristics Honda is currently focusing on. So for example, age 45 plus and household income 75,000 plus, and so on. The next step would be focusing on the greenness of the markets. So when we talk about greenness, it's basically based on 2 main elements: propensity of the users, of the consumers to green, and the problem the current markets are facing. So under problem you can see smog and particles. Propensity, some example is like what is the consumption of hybrid vehicles in that market at present. And in each of these categories we ask user to assign some weights, and accordingly we come up with some green score. So that's our second step. The third step would be using solver to optimize the outputs of step 1, and basically taking into consideration step 1 and step 2 output, using that in accordance with the budget and other constraints Honda is facing, and using solver to optimize the number of markets. So those are the 3 steps. Now Amar would take you through the actual demo of the product.
So this is our demo. You actually start on this home page, and when you get right into it, it'll prompt you to initialize the map. We've just taken the liberty to go ahead and do that ahead of time. So as Ben mentioned, it starts off with the 330 or so green markets that Honda can consider initially. So as you go into step one, we're going to look at the different criteria that Harshad mentioned. So let's say we want to look at metro areas that have at least 1 million people or more. Let's say we want to look at, we want the population of those metro areas to have at least 25% of them be 45 or up. And similarly with household income, we'll do, let's say, 14%, and then college degree, we want well-educated consumers, so let's say 26%. And just for fun, let's bump this up to 30%, because we want to make sure we have some affluent people who are older, wiser, and knowledgeable about our product. So as you submit this, it'll go through and filter down those 330 markets into some number of markets that meet all those criteria. So here it found there's 9 markets that meet those criteria. They're all highlighted in green. So you'll see the Seattle area, San Francisco, Oakland area, DC area, there's some other areas. So there's 9 of those. Now we look at the environmental rating that Harshad mentioned. So we're looking at these different factors that we think as a Honda manager might be important, and we're putting different weights on them. So let's say the current state of electricity consumption, transportation, not that important to us. So let's give it a 5% weighting. This stuff, like local efforts for sustainable environment, is really important. Current state of the environment, we think, is important. Right now, the current hybrid vehicle consumption, we think, is a good indicator of people who would buy fuel cell vehicles. Again, it's that awareness in that community, so we'll rate that 20%. And any states that have tax incentives or other incentives for people to buy alternative fuel vehicles is important for us, so we'll give that a 20%. We're not too concerned with areas that have high smog or high kind of pollution particles, so we'll just give that a 5% rating. So as you submit those, it calculates a green score, and of those 9 markets that it found in the first step, it's ranking those based on its environmental rating. So here it's just giving you the top 3 that it found with its rating. So here, the lower the rating, the better the environmental score. And then third step is to optimize the resources. So here the Honda manager is going to see what's my budget. So let's say there's a pretty big budget at 50 million, and here they're going to put in what the minimal rating they want for that environmental score. So let's just say we want at least a 40. So as you submit that, it's going to go through the solver process basically. So it's taking in the inputs from step 1, which are all the eligible markets, step 2, which is those markets' environmental ratings, and then it's also looking at other factors like the weather and dealer networks. So there's a metro area that has an established dealer network, then that's going to make it much easier for us to enter that market. So those are some certain criteria that it's going through right now.
Is it solver that's running?
Yeah, it's solver. That's right. We want to make sure we have the optimal solution, so it's going to take a few seconds to think.
Can I ask a question while this is running?
Yeah, sure.
So all those inputs you just put in, the environmental inputs,
Yep.
do those link to things from MapPoint or stuff that you got data from other sources?
No, those are from other sources. We looked at some different environmental ratings. There's different lists of like greenest cities, and those different lists emphasize some of those factors that we were weighting.
Gotcha. Okay.
And if you want to see in the end, we can kind of show you the back.
I just thought maybe it was from that point. I didn't think that. That's all. Thank you.
So of these, of those 9 markets, based on our resource constraints, it narrowed it down to some number of markets that we'll see in a second. But the top 3 that it found were San Francisco, Boston, and San Jose.
You like that, Eric?
here you can see that it's highlighted all these markets. So San Francisco. So this is the output screen. So here, these are the top 5 markets that it found in. It's actually important to know that these are not ranked in any order. We based our solver optimization on expected units that we could sell in each of these markets based on just a combination of these different factors. And but they're not ranked here because at this point it requires some sort of managerial intuition to see, what other subjective factors might influence, which markets to go into. So there, I think.
And I'll talk about that now. So the next 2 things to kind of wrap this up that we want to talk about are kind of the role of managerial inputs in the decision-making process, and again, like some of the groups before us talked about, with more time and money, where would we go with this model? So first and foremost, the idea here is that the model is like a lot of our decision support systems that we've talked about, is not designed necessarily to give you the answer, but to support the decision-making process towards the answer. So we wouldn't necessarily look at that list that Amr showed you of, I guess, San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, and San Jose and say, okay, done. Let's go to these cities. We might tweak that a little bit and say, based on these subjective criteria, let's move those around a little bit. And some examples of things that we thought about, for example, if we got the input, just if our output said Los Angeles was the most important area, well, we'd say, we're already there. We don't need to go there. If we got San Francisco and Bay Area, for example, as we do in this example, we have San Francisco and San Jose on the outputs, we might look at that and say, we're not going to get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of investment and creating buzz because it's already there. The demand for our product is already there. So let's kind of rule those out. Let's take those out of the model and look at everything else because we want to get bang for our buck. We want to invest and see kind of, as we talk about in marketing, a lift in buzz as opposed to where it already is. Similarly, kind of this applies to the same San Francisco, San Jose. Something we might want to consider as a kind of manual part of the process is markets that are very close to each other. Minneapolis and St. Paul, Portland, Eugene, San Francisco and San Jose, and kind of combine those cities and say, hey, if we combine them, is that better or worse for what we're trying to accomplish? And then last, we'll look at something like New York City. If New York City ended up on our list, we might say, all right, that city is headed towards less commuters, people that are driving, and so we want to kind of pull that out of the model as well. The reason we don't have these things built in is because we really wanted to start with 331 metropolitan areas and see what our model would do with that. We didn't want to kind of monkey with it beforehand. But after the fact, we can say, all right, here's some things that we might consider going forward. So the kind of thinking about what we might do going forward, we might want to consider more input factors. What else would be important in this decision process? And that would perhaps make the model more robust. The problem with that is that the more inputs we have, the more highly sensitive the model is to small changes in those inputs. We noticed that, for example, when we took into account the problem score, meaning how much solution the city has, if we weighted that just a little bit higher, it severely changed our results. So the more inputs we have, the more things that we have that can kind of change the output and maybe make it harder to come to a conclusion. And it also obviously takes more time the more inputs you have. And that kind of leads to the next point, which is, for example, even if we can get more precise results with more inputs, imagine a team of people sitting around trying to agree on the weightings for 20 different things. It's going to be hard for them all to agree that, yes, this is the model that these are the inputs we want to use going forward. A team of marketers or a team of kind of folks doing business development saying, I don't know, what's more important. So we have to balance that and say, do we want to spend more time on or have more factors, or do we want to have less factors so it's easier to come to a conclusion? And then, again, we talked about, for example, we didn't pull markets out manually before we started because we wanted to see where they would go. Going forward, we might say, okay, let's just filter, kind of pre-filter the metropolitan areas. And we call them MSAs, it's Metropolitan Statistical Area as defined by map point. As they stand, they might be a little bit too narrow. So, for example, within the LA area, there's like 20 different metropolitan areas. We may want to group some of those ahead of time, or pull New York out, for example, or pull the Bay Area out before we start the model. And one last thing that we didn't really bring up here, but as you heard, we currently use, as a proxy for buzz, we talked about using units sold. So the more units we sell, the more word of mouth, thus the more buzz about the vehicle, which is what Honda's trying to accomplish. Well, we may want to look at something, going forward, we might want to consider what other things might actually equate to buzz as well. Things could be, for example, media coverage, number of people searching on Google for this vehicle, things like that. Also, just kind of level of consumer awareness. So a few things we could look at going